Hi friends, old and new. We are back. Let's cover chapter 7 and I will be trying to catch up. It's been a couple days. It's got a lot going on, but it's all been good things. So I don't want you to think that I forgot about you. And I also just really like posting these. I don't know who's actually even watching them anyway. So I hope they have been helpful, and if not, they've at least been just enjoyable for me to kind of think out loud about different things that pop through my mind as I am reading these things. And if there's anything ever that feels weird or wrong or incorrect, feel free to share in the comments, you guys. I don't mind. Let's talk about it. Maybe I am wrong. All right, let's do it. The beginning of chapter 7 talks about the Roman soldier who comes out and asks Jesus for healing for one of his slaves. This is really interesting because it's a Roman officer asking for help from Jesus. So we already have seen the climate where some of the Jews are really excited about God or Jesus's message, and then how the Pharisees, the religious leaders, they are definitely not. And so here is this Roman officer who believes so much in what Jesus is able to do that he sends out for help on this. The way Luke tells the story is actually a little bit different than the way Matthew tells the story. You can compare these two seemingly different accounts of the same event, but they are not different actually, and we're going to get into just why. Some Jewish elders come up to Jesus and they're like, look, if anybody deserves some healing, it's this guy, it's this Roman officer, because he loves the Jews and has built a synagogue for us, and just basically he deserves it. And so as Jesus is on his way to go perform this miracle of healing, the officer, according to Luke's account, had sent out some friends early on and told him to stop and to not come because his household was not worthy of having him step foot in it. It was a sinner's household. Like, he recognized, this difference in who they were and religious stature and whatnot. And so he gives this analogy of the whole, well, I'm a Roman officer, and so I know that when something needs to be carried out, I tell it to my team and they carry out the task. And so likewise, I know that you don't actually need to be here to perform this miracle. You can do it from where you are. You can just say the word and it'll be done. Which I know the first time I read it, I really didn't grasp onto that right away. And I was just like, okay, but does Jesus work that way? Maybe you guys are a little bit smarter than I am, and it made sense to you right away, which is great. But yes, Jesus does work that way. And now that we've talked through a bunch of the other things he's done so far, we can see just how he's done stuff. He doesn't actually need to touch someone to heal them. And that's actually a small detail I didn't always realize or pay attention to. So Jesus is really impressed by this. And in verse 9, he says, when Jesus heard this, he was amazed. Turning to the crowd that was following him, he said, I tell you, I haven't seen faith like this in all of Israel. And when the officer's friends returned to his house, they found the slave completely healed. So let's read some of the notes that my Bible has for this. I thought they were really good. This passage marks a turning point in Luke's account of Jesus' ministry. Up to this point, Jesus has dealt exclusively with the Jews. Here he begins to include the Gentiles, which is just non-Jews. Notice the main characters in this short drama: the Jewish elders, a Roman officer, and the officer's slave. Very different racial and religious backgrounds, and vastly different standings on the social ladder. Jesus broke through all those barriers all the way to the sick man's need. The gospel travels well across ethnic, racial, national, and religious barriers. Jesus was no respecter of artificial divisions, and we should follow his example. Reach out to those whom Jesus came to save. So how did this centurion even really know about Jesus? The Roman officer was a centurion, meaning he was a captain in charge of 100 men. Century, 100. The officer heard about Jesus and obviously also heard about Jesus' healing power. He sent a request through some of the Jewish elders on behalf of his slave. He may have heard about the healing of the Roman official's son, which probably occurred earlier. He knew Jesus had the power to heal his slave. You remember my point earlier about how the way Luke tells it is a little different than the way Matthew tells it? When you read the account in Matthew, it says that the centurion himself came rather than sending people out. So here's kind of, that seems like very different accounts for things. But actually, there's a really interesting note here that indicates that it is actually not different at all. Matthew 8:5 says the Roman officers visited Jesus himself, while Luke 7:3 says he sent Jewish elders to present his request to Jesus. In those days, dealing with a person's messengers was considered the same as dealing with one of them who had sent them. That's interesting. Thus, in dealing with the messengers, Jesus was dealing with the officer. For his Jewish audience, Matthew emphasized the Roman soldier's faith. For his Gentile audience, Luke highlighted the good relationship between the Jewish elders and the Roman officer. This army captain daily delegated work and sent groups on missions, so this is how he chose to get his message to Jesus. So, going back to how Jesus was really impressed with this guy's faith, it says here the officer's faith was especially amazing because he was a Gentile who had not been brought up to know a loving God. All of that, no background, no religious background, and he just knew right away and had faith and believed it and wasn't skeptical. He was just all in. Shameless plug. A while back, I did a character study on the Centurion, and so you can actually find a whole breakdown profile of him in my Etsy shop. And what I tried to put together on it is kind of pointing out those things that we don't really think about. Like sometimes we'll go through these stories and it's like, oh, that's nice, some Roman centurion officer, and we don't really know like why that's actually a big deal, why it was specified. For example, here we read like, well, it's a Roman officer and it's not a Jewish person, and that was a big deal then. It was, here we may not understand the full historical context, but there's so much of that, and it really adds to what all of these accounts are for Jesus's ministry. So if you're interested, it's in the shop. You can download it whenever you want. So now Jesus is raising the son of this widowed woman, and this woman is distraught. Her son has died. She's already a widow, and in today's world that's maybe not like such a huge deal, because it's like, all right, like you're gonna be fine. Like, yes, it's really sad, but you'll be fine. But back then, a woman she basically had nothing left. Her husband's gone, so she's got nothing there. And then the next who would have taken care of her or even given her more kind of like a financial backing, right, would have been her son, but now he's dead. So then she's left on her own and probably forgotten, really susceptible to a lot of danger and just being taken advantage of. And so it left her in a very vulnerable situation to not have a husband, and her only child there was a son. So it's that's why it's a big deal. And Jesus understood the culture. He understood how things were at that time. And so it says, when the Lord saw her, his heart overflowed with compassion. He said, "Don't cry." Then he walked over to the coffin and touched it, and the bearers stopped. "Young man," he said, "I tell you, get up." Then the dead boy sat up and began to talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. It goes on to say that the crowd was filled with fear. It says, great fear swept the crowd, and they praised God, saying, "A mighty prophet has risen among us, and God has visited his people today." And the news about Jesus spread throughout Judea and the surrounding countryside. I used to have a real problem with the word fear in the Bible because it's, for the most part, for me, has had like a negative connotation to it. Like fear, people react in anger out of fear sometimes, right? And we can respond very unkindly because of fear. And so I've just always kind of associated it that way. It's taken in the last few years, I've understood fear in the Bible to have a definition more of reverence and awe than like I'm scared of you kind of a thing. It's more of a respect thing. And that was the case here. And then the whole part about God has visited his people today got me wondering if not necessarily if, because it was the case, they didn't have that like everyday detailed relationship with God that we are able to have today, right? And so to say that God had visited his people that day was just an indication of kind of how they saw their relationship with him. Like he's very like up there, far away deity, and we are here doing our lives on our own. So I thought that was interesting. So I want to read the notes that my Bible has for that. I don't always understand what's meant to be the takeaway for things, and I don't think that there's a structured, this is what you're supposed to take away from every story. I think there's a lot we can get from any story at any given time. But the note that's written here offered a perspective that I hadn't even considered, so which is really awesome. So let me go ahead and read that. It says, "The story illustrates salvation. The whole world was dead in sin, just as the widow's son was dead. Being dead, we could do nothing to help ourselves. We couldn't even ask for help. But God has had compassion on us, and he sent Jesus to raise us to life with him. The dead man did not earn his second chance at life, and we cannot earn our new life in Christ. But we can accept God's gift of life, praise God for it, and use our lives to do his will." Right, that's interesting because we don't know anything about his son other than he's the widow's son. So we don't know if he had some great generous life he was living because it wasn't important. It didn't matter, because no matter all the good things that we can do in our life, it doesn't make us worthy of these second chances. These are gifts that God gives us. And so I thought that was interesting because I would not have thought about that otherwise without that note. So the widow, similar to what I kind of already said, the widow's situation was serious. She had lost her husband, and now her only son had died, which was her last means of support. The crowd of mourners would go home and she would be left penniless and alone. The widow was probably past the age of childbearing and would not marry again, unless a relative came to her aid. Her future was bleak. She would be an easy prey for swindlers, and she would likely be reduced to begging for food. In fact, as Luke repeatedly emphasizes, this woman was just the kind of person Jesus had come to help, and help her he did. Jesus has great compassion on your pain, and he has the power to bring hope out of any tragedy. I really like that one song, and I forget who sings it, where it's like, there's no waste at the altar. And I've said those words before in one of the other videos, but it's true. There is no tragedy or suffering that God can't use for good. And even when things are not good, he's not done, and he's going to do and can redeem. He can redeem and will do something great with it. Also, did you know that they used to hire people to mourn back in the day? They would hire people to cry at funerals. I only learned that kind of recently. I didn't know that before, and I thought that was interesting, so I just wanted to share that too. So one more note about how they were in awe of what Jesus had done. It says, the people thought of Jesus as a prophet because, like the Old Testament prophets, he boldly proclaimed Christ's message and sometimes raised the dead. Both Elijah and Elisha raised children from the dead. The people were correct in thinking that Jesus was a prophet, but he is much more. He is God himself. Okay, so let's check in with John the Baptist again. So John the Baptist is out here fulfilling his duty, living out his calling, trying to get everyone to repent and baptizing it and focusing on repentance, right? And now here's Jesus living his ministry, doing these miracles, saying all these things, attracting all these crowds. And so he wants to know if he is truly the Messiah. Part of this is interesting to me because, like, was there no communication? Because your mom got knocked up like 5 months before I think Mary was told that she was going to have the Son of God. So did they like never share that with each other? Because John knew in the womb, he was the first one to identify the Messiah when Mary came to see Elizabeth from her belly, which is actually really fun to think about. So part of me was like, why are we asking this? Are we doubting? Are we really not sure? Like, what is happening? Did we think something changed along the way? So I'm going to get into that in a second. But he sends his disciples out to Jesus to find out and to just ask him outright, is he really the Messiah? So Jesus tells them he says, go back to John and tell him what you have seen and heard. The blind see, the lame walk, the lepers are cured, the deaf hear, the dead are raised to life, and the good news is being preached to the poor. That was verse 22, by the way. And tell him, God blesses those who do not turn away because of me. So they leave and they go talk to John. Meanwhile, Jesus turns back to the crowd and he starts addressing who John the Baptist is and was kind of like, who did you go into the wilderness to find? Did you expect to see someone in like lavish clothing, or did you find like some disheveled looking man? He goes, no, people who wear beautiful clothes and live in luxury are found in palaces. Were you looking for a prophet? Yes, and he is more than a prophet. John is the man to whom the scriptures refer when they say, look, I am sending my messenger ahead of you, and he will prepare your way before you. So at this point, we've talked about John the Baptist calling and then Jesus. You know, they went out not at the same time. They weren't born at the same time. There's a few months different, but they were cousins, and each of them had a specific role to fulfill. Jesus tells them that none is greater than John the Baptist. So he's giving John his place. He's validating all of his ministry and his preaching. But the religious leaders and the Pharisees still did not believe, and they rejected this truth, and they refused John's baptism. And then he goes on to talk about this generation. He goes, how can I describe them? They are like children playing a game in the public square. They complain to their friends. We played wedding songs and you didn't dance. So we played funeral songs and you didn't weep. For John the Baptist didn't spend his time eating bread or drinking wine, and you say he's possessed by a demon. The Son of Man, on the other hand, feasts and drinks, and you say he's a glutton and a drunkard and a friend of tax collectors and other sinners. But wisdom is shown to be right by the lives of those who follow it. It just proves that it didn't matter what you did. The Pharisees weren't going to like it. They were going to find something about this entire ministry that they were just so against. You know, they were mad at Jesus drinking and eating, and then they were mad at John the Baptist because he didn't do it. So let's read some of these notes, guys. It says, John was confused because the reports he received about Jesus were unexpected and incomplete. John's doubts were natural, and Jesus didn't rebuke him for them. Instead, he responded in a way that John would understand. Jesus explained that he had accomplished what the Messiah was supposed to accomplish. God can handle our doubts, and he welcomes our questions. I didn't always feel like I could ask God whatever I wanted. I, at one point, was feeling like I can't even doubt him. I shouldn't doubt him. That's wrong. You shouldn't ask questions. You should just believe it. Wrong, you guys. Like, God is not afraid of your questions. He is happy to answer whatever. If you think something don't sound right, take it to him. You know, have a conversation about it. He'll reveal the truth to it. Maybe there's information that we're missing at the time. But let me go back to this. Do you have questions about Jesus, about who he is or what he expects of you? Admit them to yourself and to God, and begin looking for answers. Only as you face your doubts honestly can you begin to resolve them. So a point on all the things that Jesus was listing, it says the proofs listed here for Jesus being the Messiah are significant. They consist of observable deeds, not theories, actions that Jesus' contemporaries saw and reported for us to read today. The prophets had said that the Messiah would do these very acts. These physical proofs helped John and will help all of us to recognize who he is. All of this was prophesied in the Old Testament, so we have that it was coming and how it was going to look. And now we have how it actually went down, which matches all of that. So it's good to have that, and it removes the doubt. So he goes on to talk about how John the Baptist is actually super great. The note here says, of all people, no one fulfilled his God-given purpose better than John. Yet in God's kingdom, all who come after John have a greater spiritual heritage because they have clear knowledge of the purpose of Jesus' death and resurrection. John was the last to function like the Old Testament prophets, the last to prepare the people for the coming Messianic age, Messianic for Messiah. Jesus was not contrasting John with other Christians. He was contrasting life before Christ with life in the fullness of Christ's kingdom. So the old way and the new way. And I mentioned how like the religious leaders didn't want anything to do with this. They were just so close-minded about it. There's a note here that says they were wanting to live their own way. They justified their own point of view and refused to listen to other ideas. And it's easy to write these Pharisees off like, oh my gosh, I can't believe them. Who would ever be like that? We are like that, you guys. So let's take a page from their story to try to not be, to try to recognize when we are being like that. So why were the Pharisees so upset about this? They were mad about, John the Baptist and Jesus, and one did what the other one didn't, and they were still mad about either way. There's a note here that says, what the Pharisees and experts in the law couldn't stand was being exposed for their hypocrisy. Yeah, they're being told that, they're ingenuine and they are not living a life that tracks with what they're not practicing, what they're preaching. A note goes on to say they were good at justifying their wisdom. Most of us can find compelling reasons to do or believe whatever suits our purposes if we do not examine our ideas in the light of God's truth. However, we may be just as obviously self-serving as the Pharisees. I don't know if you've heard it said, but just about anyone can justify their point of view with any verse here in the Bible. They can just grab one to support their views. And it's really important to understand the context of every passage, and let's not use these verses out of context, especially when we're trying to defend a point of view, right? It's important that we look to validate God's truth and not just our truth. So that's it for this one. I'll see you on the next one.